Thank you all for joining us today and welcome to the Monarch Butterfly Conservation Webinar Series. Today's webinar topic is Implications of Movement Ecology in Conservation Planning for Monarch Butterflies. My name is Jenna Tots, Education Coordinator for the Monarch Joint Venture. We are excited to continue hosting this webinar with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services National Conservation Training Center. We are delighted to host this presentation from Dr. Kelsey Fisher. Before we get started, here are a few expectations and community guidelines for the webinar. During the webinar, please put your questions in the chat box and we'll collect those for the Q&A session at the end. And just a reminder to keep the chat friendly and professional. Thank you. If you pause or click away or refresh the page while you are viewing the webinar, you will need to click the play button again. It will start where you left off. If you want to catch back up, you will need to slide the bar at the bottom of the video window. This webinar will be recorded and posted on both the NCTC and Monarch Joint Venture websites in 2 to 3 weeks. The entire Monarch Conservation Webinars archive is free and available to watch and contains about 7 years worth of Monarch Conservation webinars on both of our websites. If you're joining us today, but you didn't pre-register for the webinar, we would like to count you for our attendance and be able to send you follow-up resources. So please email education@monarchjointventure.org with your name and email address. Thank you so much. And finally, all of our webinar speakers represent their own viewpoints, which are not necessarily those of NCTC or the Monarch Joint Venture. And now I will introduce our presenter for today. Dr. Kelsey E. Fisher is an assistant agricultural scientist at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station in New Haven, Connecticut. Kelsey earned her PhD in entomology from Iowa State University in 2021, MS in entomology from the University of Delaware in 2015, and BS in biology from Widener University in 2013. Kelsey's research focuses on insect movement ecology as population dynamics, persistence, and distribution are emergent properties of animal movement behavior and the spatial configuration of resources. Kelsey employs multiple research methods in the field, greenhouse, and lab to address research questions related to monarch butterfly conservation in agroecosystems, including radio, telemetry, population genetics, stable isotope analysis, geospatial analysis, and spatial modeling. Most notably, evidence from this work suggests milkweed and nectar resources be planted within 50 meters of established habitat to create a functional connected landscape that facilitates monarch movement. Kelsey will discuss the collaborative work on monarch butterfly conservation conducted at Iowa State University and provide examples of how her research informs conservation strategies. Kelsey, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm just going to confirm that you can see my screen, and in a second it should be in presenting mode, hopefully. Jenna, if you could just give me a thumbs up or something that I'm good to go.
You're good, looks great.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here and to present as a part of this webinar series. So thank you so much for inviting me. And because of the platform, I can't see all the lovely faces that are attending this webinar. So I hope that you're all engaged and excited, and I'm really looking forward to any questions that you guys have throughout the presentation. So I currently am an assistant scientist at the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station. I just recently moved here in January, actually. So I've only been here for about 6 months. So most of the work that I'm going to talk about here was during my PhD and postdoc work, which was at Iowa State University. And I'm building from a lot of this work in my new position. And I'll touch on that a little bit at the end. So I know that we're with Monarch Joint Venture, so I'm sure that this is going to be just an overview of information for everybody, but I always like to start my presentations making sure that we're all on the same page and we all have the same background information, and so that we can build our knowledge together. So first, I wanted to just talk about the monarch butterfly life cycle. So monarch butterflies overwinter in central Mexico, where they all huddle together in the forests, and then in about March or late February, the butterflies will start to fly around and they'll mate with one another, and then they'll start their migration northward. And so that migration occurs. We start to see monarchs in Texas and Oklahoma in about May. And then we start to see monarchs. This is all just an approximation. We, of course, see some a little bit earlier, a little bit later, but we start to see monarchs. I'm going to talk from the Iowa perspective for this whole presentation. In Iowa in late May, early June. And then those butterflies, so when they make it to Texas, Oklahoma, the adult butterflies lay eggs on milkweed. Those adults die. The eggs become caterpillars. The caterpillars become chrysalis, and then adult butterflies. Those butterflies will mate and then continue the migration northward. So we see them in Iowa in late May, early June. Same thing happens again. We get another generation. The butterflies can either keep flying north, fly across the Appalachian Mountains, stay in Iowa, do kind of whatever they want to do at that point. And then they continue on for, it's a total of 4 generations. And the last generation that comes out is a little bit different for monarch butterflies, because that generation is the migratory butterfly that will go all the way from Iowa back down to central Mexico and overwinter with all of its friends in the forests, which then in February, that same butterfly is the one that makes it back to Texas and Oklahoma. So the big migration is done by only 1 generation of butterflies, and the rest of it's kind of like a stepwise generation, but we don't know a lot about exactly what each individual is doing. So we have the migration and the life cycle. One of the reasons we all care about monarchs and we all know about monarchs is because over the past few decades, we've been seeing that the population is declining. And the reason we know this is because the overwintering population in Mexico, they all huddle together and we're able to approximate how much space these butterflies are taking up. And we measure that in hectares of area that the butterflies are taking up. And so for the past about 3 decades now, we've been getting an approximation of how many hectares the monarchs are taking, and it's been declining. And we can see that if we look at 10-year averages, that even though there's a lot of fluctuation in this graph, insect populations fluctuate all the time, but if you look at the average for 10-year increments, you can see a pretty strong decline happening. And we know that the milkweed decline the monarch decline has a lot of reasons. There's lots of different factors that go into this. But the one that I'm going to focus on today is the loss of milkweed in the Midwest. So if you look over to the map on the left that's just changed, the northern breeding core is that dark purple area. And so it's the biggest loss of milkweed has been impacted in that dark purple region, and we call that the north breeding core. So it's estimated that within that dark purple area, there is about, as of 2017, there was about 1.6 billion stems of milkweed in that area. And that amount of monarchs, if we assume that milkweed is the limiting resource for the monarch butterflies, which I'm going to do for this presentation, would support about 3.2 hectares of overwintering monarchs. And we get that number just by how many butterflies are overwintering when we know that's how much milkweed is out in the landscape. So in order to get an overwintering goal, oh, sorry, I'm ahead of myself. So we know that in this dark purple area, there's 1.6 billion stems of milkweed. And that's been, in 2017, we had a bunch of surveys that came out and said that's probably as of 2017, that's probably what was going on in that area. So in order to have a strong population, a strong resilient population, we are approximating that it would be good to have 6 hectares of overwintering monarchs as a long-term goal. So if we could get a 10-year average that was 6 rather than 3 hectares of overwintering monarchs, we think that we would have a strong population. And so in order to get an overwintering goal of 6 hectares, we would need to establish an additional 1.3 billion new stems of milkweed in that purple breeding core. Iowa specifically is responsible for 150 million of those stems. And so that's a whole lot of milkweed. So in Iowa, we have a highly modified landscape that is all entirely agroecosystems, and about 92.6% of the land in Iowa is in agriculture production. And of that land, of all the land in Iowa, 97.2% of it is privately owned. So we don't have state parks that are huge and expansive. We don't have a lot of public land. So if we're going to be doing anything for monarch butterfly conservation, we need to, one, be working with agriculture because that's the dominant land cover type in our state. And two, we need to be working with our landowners because they're the ones that are going to be making the decisions for what happens on their property. So when we think about needing to establish an additional 1.3 billion stems of milkweed in Iowa and these challenges of heavy agriculture, intensification, and private land, where should we focus our efforts? Because we're not going to be establishing 1.3 billion stems of milkweed in 1 year. It's not possible, which is why I'm talking about 2017, but we're still struggling with this challenge now. There's just not enough seed to be sourced to be able to establish that much milkweed. The land isn't all ready. There's lots of logistical problems with trying to establish 1.3 billion stems of milkweed. So I joined Iowa State University in 2016, and I joined this group called the Iowa State University Monarch Working Group, which is a part of the Iowa Monarch Conservation Consortium. And this is a group of over 30 collaborators from 5 different departments and 2 colleges. So we had entomologists, plant pathologists, agronomists, weed scientists, all kinds of statisticians, economists, all kinds of different people coming to the table to talk about what we can do in Iowa for monarch butterfly conservation. And so this group aims to provide evidence-based, biologically informed strategies for monarch butterfly conservation that work with agriculture production. So our group never advocates to take any productive land out of production. We want to make sure that we're doing things that are benefiting the monarchs and benefiting the farmer at the same time. And so my role as a PhD and postdoc student in this group was to undertake some integrative basic research questions and work with the other colleagues to come up with some applications and strategies that can be used by the landowners in Iowa. And I'll get to the details of this a little bit more, but as we go on through this presentation, but it really was like we would make progress in one part of the project and then we would take that information and put it into another part of the project. And then that would give us more things that we could go back to the first step and refine that part as well. So we were trying to come up with a robust strategy that could be implemented and be successful for monarch butterflies based on the monarch's biology and what they do naturally. So monarch butterflies are highly mobile. So we know that the breeding or the migratory populations undergo that huge migration that's all the way from Mexico to Canada. But the monarchs that we see in Iowa in June and July and August, they're really mobile too. So if you have monarch butterflies on your property, as adults, they don't necessarily live on your property. They kind of go to one place. The females will lay eggs, the females will continue on and try and find another place to lay their eggs. Sometimes you'll see males patrolling an area, but for all of this research, we're focusing specifically on the females because we're assuming that there's enough males out there patrolling areas that the females are going to get mated, and it's the females that are laying their eggs. And so we want to know what's happening for the females to lay eggs and the eggs to then become caterpillars and continue on with the life cycle. So we know that the females will go to one area, lay some eggs, move on to another area. So this is a picture of a roadside in Iowa. We have some soybean on one side, some corn on the other, and our very minimal private or public land that we have in the state is our roadsides. So there's been a lot of effort to do monarch butterfly conservation efforts on gravel roadsides in Iowa and in the Midwest in general, because the roadsides are public land, so we can do stuff there. But you can see in this picture, there's really no milkweed. So a lot of the roadsides don't have anything, so they're going to need a lot of remediation or things like that. But let's assume that this roadside has one milkweed stem. And if there's one milkweed stem on that roadside, most likely a monarch is going to find that milkweed and lay an egg on it. So the research that I was undertaking at Iowa State was how does that female find that one isolated milkweed stem on that roadside? And where what does it do when it gets there? How did it get there? Where will it go next? And I'm specifically saying it because I kind of dabble in both the adult butterfly work and also caterpillars. So how does the adult find that milkweed to lay an egg on it and then leave that milkweed and go somewhere else? But then the caterpillar, what does it do when it is a caterpillar on that milkweed? And then also, where does that caterpillar go once it becomes an adult? And what happens while it's there? So it's a lot about finding resources and using resources. And out of my research, we were aiming to come up with some applications and strategies for monarch butterfly conservation. So if we could establish habitat that would strategically increase, 1, the number of eggs that each female lays, and 2, the survival of the larvae that come from the eggs that those females lay, we'd be able to get more monarchs. So more eggs equals more caterpillars equals more butterflies means bigger overwintering population in Mexico. So we want to try and get the population as high as we can, as quickly as we can. So today I'm going to tell you 2 stories about my research. The first one is talking about increasing the number of eggs that each female lays in the landscape. And the second one is about increasing the survival of individual larvae. So first, we'll talk about how do we get females to lay more eggs in the landscape. So to get females to lay more eggs, we need to think about what they're doing naturally and what the landscape is set up for, so we can maybe adapt our landscape to help the monarchs be more successful. So here I have a picture of a real area of Iowa's landscape. And most of this is agriculture. We have some forest fragments you can see, but then we also have these red splotches, and the red is areas that have been, it's restored habitat that has milkweed and nectar resources. And there's monarchs there all the time. Then they're really happy when they're in there. But one of the things that I want to remind you of is that the breeding season monarchs are highly mobile. So if we see monarch butterflies in this area that's surrounded by a yellow circle, they're not going to stay there forever. They're going to stay there for a little while, they'll lay their eggs, and then they'll move on to something else. So it would be really great if we could get the monarchs to move from this area that's in a yellow circle to the red area that is shaped as an L. If they could just take one step and go over, that would be fantastic. More likely what's happening is that the monarchs will undergo a random walk. So when they decide that it's time to leave the habitat patch that's great, and they want to lay eggs somewhere else, they'll undergo a random walk, meaning they just kind of fly until they pick up a signal that there's something good over in another area, and then they can fly directly to that area. So because I've been in Iowa for the last 7 years, I feel like I need to make a Field of Dreams reference. And so the biggest part of this is if you establish habitat, the monarchs will find it. And that's great. They will find it. But the question is, how long does it take for them to find it? And how much energy does it waste? How much energy does it cost them in order to find the new resources? And is there a way that we can make finding milkweed more efficient for monarchs? So habitat connectivity is kind of the answer to that. And because monarchs like small patches of habitat and they go in one area, lay a few eggs, move on, lay a few eggs, move on, lay a few eggs, small habitat patches are really great for monarchs. And so what we could do is we could create what's called functional connectivity. So rather than having just like a straight corridor of milkweed and nectar resources across Iowa, we could have stepping stones of milkweed and nectar resources that fall within the monarch's perceptual ability. So they'd be able to detect that there's milkweed and nectar resources. And so rather than taking an aimless walk until they eventually pick up on a cue, maybe they'll already have the cue that there's something really good over there. And if we were able to create functional connectivity through stepping stones of habitat, this would decrease the amount of time that monarchs are searching for milkweed. And because of that, it would increase the number of eggs that they're able to lay, because they're not looking. The more time they interact with milkweed, the more eggs that will get laid. So for this whole section of this talk, I'm going to use three specific words. And I just wanted to give you the definitions of these before I move on with more. So first is perceptual distance, which I've already said once and haven't defined. So perceptual distance is the distance that stimuli will influence behavior. So if a butterfly is flying in one direction and it picks up on a really lovely smelling flower that it wants to go take a drink from, then it will turn its direction and no longer be going in that first direction. It'll fly towards the flower. So it was able to detect the flower and it modified its behavior. It modified the direction it was moving. The second is step length, which I think I've also already said once without defining. A step length is the distance between two locations. So if we were able to get a butterfly to move from the red patch that was circled in yellow to this new little orange patch that I've created, that would be a 47-meter step. And then the last one is turn angle, and this is the angle created from three locations. So if we're going to call the three habitat patches in this figure locations, then it would be the angle created by the 47-meter line and the 351-meter line. Okay. However, one thing to remember is that it would be really great if we knew all of this information, if we knew how far monarchs could see and smell milkweed or how they're moving at a landscape scale. But insect movement and dispersal studies at this scale are very limited, and it's because it's really challenging to track them. Insects are small and they all look the same. So if you see one monarch, you don't know if it's the same monarch you saw earlier or if it's a different one. There's just a lot of challenges with, we can't use GPS like we can use on wolves and deer and things like that. So insects come with their own challenges because they're small. So there haven't been a ton of studies on insect movement ecology. So when I first arrived at Iowa State University in 2016, there was a postdoc working named Tyler Grant who was creating a spatially explicit agent-based model to understand how monarchs are moving across the landscape. And this is all just done in a computer and based off of expert opinion, because there's not a lot of empirical evidence that says what the monarchs are doing at these large distances. And so what Tyler did is he came up with a map of Iowa, and then he put some monarch butterflies, he dropped them down into that map of Iowa in a video game type format. And he said, okay, butterflies, you can move around this landscape and lay eggs as much as you'd want based on a handful of parameters. And so three of the important parameters that I'll talk about today, there's a bunch more, but the first one is perceptual distance, which is what I already talked about, with the second one being step length, and then the third one being directionality. So in Tyler's model, he made the step length always 50 meters just for simplicity, because if you make things more complicated, then sometimes computers have a harder time. It takes longer to run the model, those kinds of things. So the two that we're able to change is the perception distance, so how far monarchs can see and smell resources, and the directionality, which is the turn angle. So that's the angle created from all those points. So it's how straight or how tortuous monarch butterfly flight patterns are. So in A here, you'll see that the butterflies have a short perceptual range, meaning that they can see and smell up to 50 meters in front of them. But they have high directionality, so they're always flying in straight lines. And in this map, the yellow lines are the flight patterns of 10 butterflies. And then if you adjust the parameters so they have a long perceptual range, but they still fly in straight lines, the butterflies use a lot less space. So they find something really good and they know that there's nothing else good around them, and so they don't leave that really great place. They'll continue to lay eggs in the same area. And then in C here, we have short perceptual ability, so 50 meters, and low directionality. And you can see that in all three of these, they're using space in different ways. And so when I arrived at Iowa State and I was looking at this and working with Tyler, talking about all the different ideas, I said, well, how do we know which one's real? How do we know which parameters are representative of what the monarchs are really doing? We can already say that B is probably not realistic because we know the butterflies are moving from one habitat patch to another, and here they're not leaving that really great patch. So is it A or is it C? Is directionality that big of a difference? And what happens if we change the perception? And so I wanted to know what was representative of what butterflies were really doing. And so after scouring the literature to try and figure out how we could track monarch butterflies because we can't use GPS, I decided to use VHF radio telemetry, which is a active radio transmitter that gets attached to the monarch butterfly. It has a battery and a transmitter. It emits a radio frequency in pulses, and the pulses are always the same distance away from each other in time. And if you're pointing your antenna that detects the antenna and the receiver together, detect the signal. If you're pointing the antenna directly at the butterfly or at the transmitter, then you get a really loud signal. And if you're pointing the antenna and the receiver away from where the butterfly is, you get a really quiet signal. And so by using this technology, we're able to get some approximations of from where we're standing, which direction is the butterfly. And then you're able to walk in on them and relocate them and find them. And so it's a really great system to be able to recover the butterflies. So I get these questions all the time. The transmitter itself is about the size of a sunflower seed. It weighs about a quarter of a gram. My butterflies on average weigh about half a gram. And I had an undergraduate student work with me back in 2016, and we did not see a significant impact of the butterflies with transmitters on behavior. So the time they spent resting or feeding or flying. So it seems like the butterflies that have transmitters are fairly representative of butterflies that don't have transmitters. So what we did was we took our antennas and our receivers and we let butterflies go in restored prairies, and we tracked them and tried to find the locations where they were every minute. And we were able to create what I lovingly call a connect the dots pattern. And so we knew where the butterfly was every minute. We had some error on that based on how we were able to detect where the signal was coming from. And then we were able to put the pattern together to see where they were going, how long they were spending places, and things like that. So we collected information on step length and information on turn angle. And then we did this about 150 more times. And we released butterflies all over the place. So those first ones that I showed you was butterflies released in a prairie. And then in A, we have butterflies released in a nice prairie area. In B, we have butterflies that were released in a grass waterway. In C, I have some butterflies that were released in cornfields. And then in D, I have some butterflies that were released on the edge of a cornfield and a restored prairie. And so we released the butterflies, tracked them for up to an hour, and then recovered the butterflies so we could get the transmitter off, put it on another butterfly. And we did this so many times. And so this is just a handful of examples of what the butterfly flight patterns looked like. But because we looked at so many, I'm just going to summarize the results for you here. Based on these flight patterns that we were able to track, we have evidence that the monarch butterfly's perceptual distance may be up to 125 meters, but most often the butterflies' behaviors were modified at less than 50 meters. So if there was a resource about less than 50 meters away from them, they would fly towards it. We also saw that the step lengths are typically less than 50 meters, and the butterflies would take short steps when they were within a favorable habitat like a restored prairie. And they would take longer steps when they were in an unfavorable habitat, like a cornfield. A really similar story happened with the turn angles, where we had wide turn angles, meaning that the butterflies were flying in straight lines, or wide turn angles, meaning the butterflies were turning around a lot. Sorry, I had that backwards in my head. So wide turn angles means they were turning around a lot when they were in a favorable habitat, like a restored prairie that has lots of different flowers or milkweed or anything. And then narrow turn angles when they were in an unfavorable habitat, like a cornfield. So they were going in straight lines when they were in places that had no resources for them. And then overall, some of their flight patterns were oriented with the direction of the wind. And so the monarchs would either fly into the wind or fly with the wind. And that is just a really important thing to note that we didn't necessarily know before. And from all of these observations, we can conclude that monarchs really are vagile. We were able to observe them traversing over 500 meters of crop fields to a resource habitat. So even if they couldn't necessarily detect it, they still did it, and then they found something good. And they crossed habitat edges all the time. And some of them were taking really, really large steps of almost 2 kilometers or 2,000 meters. So from all of this information, the recommendation that we decided on was that if we could establish habitat patches 50 meters apart within agricultural landscapes, we would probably be able to facilitate efficient monarch movement, because most of the time they were influenced by stimuli within 50 meters of them. However, because of some of these other behaviors like flying with the wind or taking really large steps or flying over cornfields, even though they don't know if there's anything good on the other side of the cornfield, it doesn't have to be a perfect grid of every 50 meters. So it doesn't have to be perfect. We don't have to do exactly that in order to help save the monarch. We can be strategic while we're thinking about this and do things that are good for farmers, good for landowners. But if we have the opportunity to put habitat patches at 50-meter distances, I think we should take that opportunity. And the information from my work was added into the model, and then we worked with a bunch of other projects that were all coming together, and that was added into the model. And back in 2022, in December of 2022, we had a paper that was published in Bioscience that is a collaborative manuscript, and it's a big one. It has lots and lots of information. It's kind of the summary of everything that the Iowa Monarch Conservation Consortium did for 7 years. And so if you're interested in more of like what all of this integrated project looked like, that's the paper to go look for. I'm going to switch gears now and talk about how we can increase larval survival. This one will be a little bit of a shorter story, so we definitely have time for questions. Okay, so again, I'm going to start with my biological considerations. The first thing is that common milkweed in the landscape can either occur in really dense patches, or it can occur as an isolated stem. And then the second thing is that milkweed is not used evenly for oviposition by monarchs. So what I mean by that is that this large patch of milkweed that has over 100 milkweed stems, I've counted them, that big patch has over 100 milkweed stems, you'll only find 3 to 10 eggs in that patch. But this isolated stem of milkweed, you also could find 3 to 10 eggs on that patch too, or on that stem. And so there's lots of food and lots of resources in the big milkweed patch. And there's not so much on the isolated, but you're getting the same number of eggs. And so this idea kind of sparked a whole nother direction for my research. And I'm building from a lot of what happened in this project in my new role in with the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. And so my big question was 3 to 10 eggs on one stem. That doesn't seem like there's enough food there for it to become 3 to 10 adults. So my question that sparked a whole project was, can one stem of milkweed support larval development of one caterpillar all the way to adulthood? So to answer this question, I put stems of milkweed in cages, and I put one caterpillar on each stem as a little neonate, a little first instar, and I let it grow on that milkweed stem all the way until it pupated. And I went back 2 times every day and checked the cages to see where the caterpillars were, how much food was left, lots of approximations of and data and things like that. And what I noticed was I started to see the monarchs not on their milkweed stem anymore. And this was before they became 5th instars. So often with caterpillars and with monarchs specifically, they'll undergo what's called prepupal wandering in between the 5th instar and pupation. And that's when the caterpillar is trying to find a nice, safe place to pupate because they sit there for about 9 days and they're really vulnerable. And so they don't want to pupate near their food source. And even researchers, we have a hard time finding the chrysalis in nature. I know some people see them on signposts and things like that, but we're not finding tons and tons of them. We still don't really know where they're pupating because they're just trying to find somewhere safe. And it's not really specific. And so we would expect to see the caterpillars on the side of the cage in the 5th instar, but I was seeing them before they were 5th instars. So I was seeing them as 4th instars on the side of the cage. And that just felt a little weird because the whole point of a caterpillar is to eat so that it can support its adult stage. And so to investigate this a little bit further, I decided to put one caterpillar on a cage with 2 milkweed stems, one caterpillar in a cage with 3 milkweed stems, and one caterpillar in a cage with 4 milkweed stems. And I replicated this a bunch of times. And I did the same thing to see if the number of milkweed stems in the cage had any influence on how often and when they were leaving this milkweed. Because I was thinking maybe the milkweed's not good anymore, and that's why they're on the side of the cage. Maybe they need a new milkweed stem. And so I decided to provide them with new milkweed stems. I did the same thing where I watched them every day, twice a day. Where are they? How much food are they eating? All of those kinds of things. And what I saw is that this movement onto the side of the cage or onto a different milkweed or something, it seems to be an innate behavior because all of them did it. And it happened for all of them before the 5th instar. So it was before pre-pupal wandering. The first time that they would leave their milkweed that I put them on usually happened in the 4th instar. There's some variation in that, but overwhelmingly it was happening in the 4th instar. And I also added, in another experiment, I added a second caterpillar to the same plant to see if that had any influence on if they were moving at a different time or anything. And even having an intraspecific competitor, even having another monarch caterpillar in the cage with them, it didn't change how often they were moving or how or when that movement happened. So it was within the 4th instar, the caterpillars leave their stem. And one of the other things that I was approximating is how much food they need. So it seems like the monarchs are able to make it to adulthood on one stem of milkweed, but that one stem of milkweed isn't really enough for them because they have some reason to go find a new plant. So the amount of biomass that's provided by one milkweed stem, but they eat it from multiple stems. So from this research, I have lots of questions still of like, why does this happen? Because I have hundreds of caterpillars that I've watched leave their milkweed stems in the 4th instar. And so I have tons of things that I'm working on now with, I think I have like 7 different hypotheses for why this might be happening. And so I have lots of projects going on in the lab to try and figure all of this out. But even without knowing why they're doing it, we can give some recommendations because we know they're doing it. So my recommendation, if you're planting common milkweed in your backyard, is to avoid isolated stems of milkweed. And if possible, if we could maintain 3 closely spaced milkweeds, my milkweeds in my cage were about 16 centimeters apart, and they were successful at finding a new stem. But if we could maintain at least 3 closely spaced milkweeds in backyard gardens to increase larval survival. And again, I do not recommend doing this in like a big habitat restoration because milkweeds come and go in their different patch densities and the location of the plants changes and shifts as years come and years go. And so nature kind of does it for us in a restored prairie area. The real recommendation for this is if it's in a backyard garden, where oftentimes I would have conversations with landowners and they'd say, oh yeah, I left 1 milkweed for the monarchs. And so we wanted to see, is that 1 milkweed that's being saved in a backyard enough to support a monarch? And really we say like, how about you plant 3 milkweeds instead? Because I know that sometimes these milkweeds, they escape landscaping and everything, and people want to get rid of them if they're coming up in their grass or they're coming up in a place where they don't want them. And it's great, that's fine, but let's not just leave 1, let's leave 3. So from all of the work that I was conducting over the 7 years I spent at Iowa State, I came up with a handful of other projects too, but specifically from the talk that I was giving today, I have 2 recommendations. If we could plant habitat 50 meters apart in agricultural landscapes, that would be able to facilitate efficient monarch movement. We'd get more eggs. We'd get monarchs spending less energy trying to find milkweed. It would be easier for them to find it. However, they do other behaviors, and so it doesn't have to be perfect. If we can't get habitat every 50 meters, it's fine. It will be okay. The more important thing is to get habitat established, not necessarily how far apart it is. And my other recommendation is to avoid isolated stems of milkweed if you can. I don't want anybody going out to their big habitat restoration acres and separating milkweed patches because nature does it over time. And so it's not going to if you have a ton of milkweed this year, maybe next year you won't have a ton of milkweed and it might shift around a little bit. Or if you have some isolated stems, the next year maybe 2 or 3 will pop up. So in a restoration, just let nature do its thing. But if you're maintaining your gardens in your backyard, let's keep 3. So I have so many people to thank for this research. I would not be able to do this by myself at all. I had a ton of people out in the field with me while we were using radio telemetry. I had a ton of students with me in the greenhouses while we were watching all these caterpillars. I have funding sources from all over the place. And I think I'm going to tag over to Jenna where she'll be able to help me if I have any questions.
Thank you so much, Kelsey, for sharing your knowledge with us today. As someone who is new to Monarch Joint Venture, I learned so much. So thank you so much. We're going to take a few minutes for Q&A. If we don't have time to answer every question, which I think we will send the remaining questions to Kelsey after the webinar, and we'll include those answers in the follow-up email that will go to everyone who did register for the webinar. So let's start with first question here. It's from Craig. He says, roadsides in Southwest Iowa used to have a lot of milkweed and other native wildflowers. Based on what I've seen, those roadsides are being planted with hay during peak monarch raising, and has spraying also reduced roadside floral diversity?
Yeah. So in my time in Iowa, we worked really closely with the Department of Transportation, the Iowa Monarch Conservation Consortium. So I was a part of the research group, but the bigger overarching thing is this group of representatives from all over the state that are coming together to try and actually implement the strategies that we're coming up with in the research. So we had representatives from Department of Transportation, representatives from Iowa Corn, Iowa Soy, USDA, any of the things we have going on in the state. We had schools that were a part of it and all kinds of things. So what I've been told is that if DOT does something to some construction of some kind on a road, and they dig up the side in order to do that, rather than planting grass seed, they'll plant a native plant mix. One of the things that was always kind of a challenge with DOT is that we need to have buffers for safety, for driving safety. So I know that there's still always going to be at least a strip of mowing going on. It also has to do with the county you're in. So some counties have different expectations for what the roadsides are going to look like. So I'm sad to hear that they were planting to be hayed, especially because it's public land. But yeah, I'm not totally certain. From my experience, I've been seeing things move in a positive direction, but I guess the work still has to be done.
Thank you. Vanita has a question here. It says, I'm trying to determine if 2 types of plants are near each other, if that reduces the monarch's traveling time, and if they will produce more eggs. Is the answer to mingle nectar plants with milkweed plants to keep them in the area longer?
Wonderful. That's a great question. So this is something I haven't really dove totally into, and there might be some other resources out there. But from my experience watching butterflies, which is hours and hours and hours and hours of watching monarch butterflies, is that they kind of have 2 modes. Like one of them is a foraging mode. And so if they're in the foraging mode, they'll hop from one flower to another flower to another flower to another flower, and they'll just forage along the way. They also have oviposition mode, which is when they'll lay a few eggs on a milkweed stem, go find a new milkweed stem, lay a few eggs, go find a new milkweed stem, lay a few eggs. And they don't really mingle. So if the butterfly is currently exhibiting behavior of oviposition, it's going to just keep looking for milkweed. And if it's feeding, then it's just going to keep feeding. What I've noticed in my time is that I see them feeding more often than I see them ovipositing. And so I would say this little thing with my team. I'd be like, nectar always wins. The nectar is what's attracting them to your yard. And then they happen to find milkweed while they're there. And so then maybe they'll switch modes and start doing oviposition. So yes, definitely intermingle your milkweed with your nectar resources, because those butterflies are hungry to be able to support. And yeah, so you picked up on it. Perfect. That's exactly what I would recommend doing. Yeah.
Great. Is the study or assessment of impact of the transmitter on movement by the undergrad that you messaged, was that published?
Yep.
Would appreciate learning more about that.
Yeah. So I have that in a paper I published in 2020. We have some reference to that, I think, and it might be reported in like the appendix information, but I'm pretty sure there's a little paragraph that talks about it. So it's not like a full study just going into that. It's a study going into the radio telemetry work, but we added that in there. So I can make sure to get Jenna the papers that I've published related to all the work that I talked about today. So
Great.
Yes.
Great. Thank you for your question, Emma. Susan was asking, was only common milkweed studied?
Yes. I only studied common milkweed. I should have said that earlier. I'm sorry. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I only studied common milkweed because it's the one, it sounds so silly, but it's the most common milkweed we have out there. It's the most abundant that we have in at least Iowa, if not all of the Midwest. And as much as the other ones are great and beautiful, a lot of places only have common milkweed. And so we were interested in just looking at that one. Some of my research does have some of my research plots did have butterfly milkweed in it. And I will always advocate for butterfly milkweed. One, it's beautiful. Two, it's kind of more bushy than the common milkweed. And so it doesn't take over your garden if you're going to be planting. It gets big, but it doesn't sprawl like the common milkweed does. And so I think that that's really great for landowner management if they're going to try and have a nice garden in their backyard or something. And then the third one is that there was another student that was working with me while I was at Iowa State, and she did a project to look at how the different milkweed species impact larval growth and development and also adult oviposition rates. And we are really, really lucky because there are 3 species of milkweed that are commercially available for us to purchase. We have butterfly milkweed, common milkweed, and swamp milkweed. Those are the 3 you'll find in your nurseries. Those are the 3 you'll find from seed as easy as possible. And those are the 3 species of milkweed that the Monarchs do the best on. So we're doing great. We got really lucky. So yes, I only studied common milkweed, but the other ones are great too. And I would also recommend planting more than just common milkweed in your property, because the different species of milkweed do different in different years. So swamp milkweed, I think it's also been termed Cinderella milkweed recently. I'm not quite sure. It has really nice pink flowers. But that one does well in wet years. So if we get a lot of rain, then swamp milkweed will do really well. It also does well in riparian areas or swampy areas or things they just hold a little bit more moisture. And then you have common milkweed and butterfly milkweed that have other conditions as well. And so if you get a mix of all 3 of them, then some years one will do really well and other years another will do really well. And you're always providing milkweed on your property.
Maybe you kind of answered this already, but I'm just going to ask it anyways, just if there's anything else you want to add. Does swamp milkweed and butterfly weed serve the same purpose for monarchs as the common milkweed?
Yes, okay. It does. Yeah, right. Of course. Yeah.
Awesome. What is the importance of milkweed in the Texas-Oklahoma pass-through states?
Okay. I do not know a ton about the Texas and Oklahoma pass-through states and milkweed. If we look at what the Fish and Wildlife Service has put out, that falls into the South Core region of the United States. So if we think back to my picture, I can share my screen again. Yeah. So if you look at this picture where it's purple and we have the North Breeding Core, that's where we're focused on milkweed establishment specifically. The South Core region, this is where we focus on nectar resources. So nectar, early blooming nectar and late blooming nectar, because since you said it too, it's a pass through. They really need to focus on forage at that time. I know that milkweed is important as well. I know there's a few different species of milkweed that are native down in that area. But from what has been put out by the Fish and Wildlife Service based on research and things, nectar is really, really what's important down in the South.
Great, thank you. A few more here. Do more mature milkweed stems do a better job of supporting the fourth and fifth instars, or do younger stems do better? And do rhizome clones foragation stems do a better job for density for the instars, or do individual plantings yield better results?
Great question. Yeah, so this is actually one of the things that I'm looking at right now. That I've built into the program I'm working on now. So one of the things I started to notice while we were looking at these caterpillars that would leave their milkweed stems is that a lot of the new vegetation on the top of the plant, the soft, pliable leaves, they were all eaten and gone. And the leaves on the bottom of the plant were still there. And in plant physiology, the new leaves are softer, they're easier to digest, they have more nitrogen, which is why caterpillars are eating anyway. They're trying to get all the nitrogen they can. And the leaves on the bottom are a little more brittle and tough and dirty, and they might have some induced defenses in them, and they have less nitrogen. And so I'm thinking that the monarchs are preferring new vegetation over old vegetation. Also, just because of like going out and looking for monarchs, you often don't find eggs on old leaves. They'll almost always be on those soft top leaves. And so when the plants start to get really big, you won't really see very many monarchs on them. And so I always advocate to trim back your milkweeds at strategic times because they'll grow again. And so there's a lot of really great resources. I'm pretty sure Monarch Joint Venture actually has a few of them that has mowing guides for the different latitudes across the United States. And it says like, at this time of the year, you should mow at this time, or if you're in Kansas, you should mow during these 2 weeks or something like that. And it's all based on approximations of when you're going to be having monarch butterflies ovipositing on milkweed. And it allows for the plants to grow back because they like the new soft stuff. When it comes to the clones, I don't think it really matters. I think it's okay to just let your plants grow their own little clones rather than planting a few different plugs. I think it more is feasibility for you. So whatever is best for you is going to be good for the monarch too. They just need milkweed.
Simple enough, right?
Yeah.
Looks like we've got two more, unless we got a couple other people asking. I always hate seeing the monarchs getting taken out by a semi on those medians. Wouldn't it be safer for them on the roadside plantings? Also, the movement reports would change then for the monarchs that are traveling south. Have you done studies on movement of the travelers?
Yeah. So I haven't really done studies on those types of systems yet, but it is hard. It's really hard because so let's just think Iowa, because it's the example I've been giving and everyone can get on my little story. We don't have any public land that's not on a roadside. So it really is important for landowners to be putting habitat in for themselves, either through like a CP program or an EQIP or something, or just doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, in order for us to not have to establish habitat on roadsides. And one of the reasons that we do what we're doing is that we don't want to establish all of the habitat. Like, we don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket. Monarchs don't do that. They go across all the different places. So we don't want to put all of our habitat establishment efforts into one basket either. We don't want to say like, oh, roadsides will solve all of our problems, because they come with their own problems, like potential semis hitting our monarchs, and it's really sad. So if we have habitat in other places, perfect.
Great, thank you. Could this abandonment explain finding fewer caterpillars when doing MLMP surveys? We find lots of younger ones, but few older.
Yes, 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 yes. So there are a bunch of papers based off of MLMP data that say that there's like mortality later at later instars because you're not finding them. Yes, I totally think that it has to do with that. So if you're doing a survey, my recommendation, and this is Kelsey Fisher, not Monarch joint venture, is rather than just looking at your one plant, look at a few around too, see if you can find a milkweed. But I don't know if that goes against the survey design and if you're allowed to do that. But I think I would be really curious to look at the surrounding milkweeds and see if you find a caterpillar on one of those that's around there. So, or even on the ground, because I think that they anyway, yeah. So that yes, I agree totally.
Great, thank you. Another question popped up. Are these studies also being done in the Western region?
My studies are not being done in the Western region. But the information that we're getting out of what I've been working on can be extrapolated to the Western monarchs. There's nothing that shows that they're genetically distinct populations. So we should be able to take the information from the Eastern populations and come up with some approximations of what's happening on the West. I know there's definitely a ton of researchers that are doing things out there. And I know just because of the communities that sometimes the research priorities are a little bit different. Like for me, I work with farmers and agriculture and corn and soy. That's not what's going on the West Coast. And so I know that there's some different approaches and things. So we try to work together so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel and do it in both places. If information that we're getting out here with our priorities is going to be able to help inform what's going on in the West, then hopefully that helps. I don't know.
All right. Well, it looks like that's all the time we've got for questions. Thanks again to Kelsey today for presenting. Thanks to NCTC for hosting the webinar and to all of you for participating. We hope to see you for our next webinar when we'll be joined by Rob Davis, who will present on solar energy and pollinator habitats on July 25th. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It was great.